This is the fourth episode of the Grow Sanctuary podcast, and in this episode, I interview Andrew LaTour of GembaRed, which is a red light therapy device company, but they also sell some other products as well. And so I discuss with Andrew red light therapy, but also ambient red light and natural sources of red light. And it's a very beginner-friendly episode. The only thing that we sort of assume is that you at least understand that artificial blue light is unhealthy. As long as you understand that, you will be able to understand the podcast. And I think if you're, someone who has an intermediate level of knowledge about red light therapy, you'll also get value out of this podcast. So we go into obviously what is red light therapy, then some of the variables to consider when choosing a red light therapy device. So some of the variables are wavelength, lux, intensity, irradiance, flicker, beam angle, EMF, the distance your body is from the device, and much more. We cover some of the science behind red light therapy. We go over the GembaRed product line briefly, and he has some very innovative and unique products. I think some one-of-a-kind products that don't really exist anywhere else on the market. And we cover some, recent events that have occurred in the red light therapy industry. We also cover quality control, debunk some myths, and finish off with a fun Q&A at the end with some questions from my Instagram audience. Hello and welcome to the show, Andrew.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. So I thought we could start off for beginners, someone who's new to red light therapy. What is it?
Well, red light therapy, what we're going to talk about is more non-thermal wavelengths of red and near-infrared spectrum wavelengths, where it's used mostly to stimulate the mitochondria and stimulate certain processes in our cells and in our body, to promote things like healing, to promote inflammation reduction, to improve recovery, and just a lot of really fascinating studies that have been done over the past, now it's been about 60 years of studies ever since the first lasers were, invented in the 1960s. And they've been studying low-level laser therapy and photobiomodulation. Those are the two keywords to look out for, is LLLT and PBM. Those are there's a big body of scientific evidence, and it's continuing to grow because there's a lot of very good evidence of how effective it is and all the different applications that it can be used for. So, nowadays, instead of using lasers, which, the industry kind of started with, lasers can be kind of expensive. They can be a little bit more specialized. You want someone that knows what they're doing to handle lasers and protect your eyes. Now the market's moved into LEDs, which LEDs are non-coherent light sources. They're much cheaper, and you can start to make them with high enough irradiances to get the benefits that would be similar to what you expect from a laser study. So that's where, we've seen in the past 5-10 years, LED light therapy and these light therapy panels have really taken off for red light therapy purposes.
And so you mentioned LEDs a non-coherent source. What does that mean?
That's kind of non-coherent is kind of where the wavelengths aren't quite stacking up. Like a laser has a very straight line, and all the wavelengths are really stacked up nicely. And usually a laser is monochromatic. There's only one wavelength, meaning mono. LEDs are actually kind of pseudo monochromatic. So you'll have a wavelength, so a 660 nanometer LED. There's actually a plus or minus on either side. So it's 660, plus, there's kind of a curve on each side. So you have some wavelengths all the way up to, say, 700, and then all the way down to 630, and it kind of tails off. So it's not non-coherent is also the kind of wavelengths we expect from the sunlight, is just a broader spectrum. It's kind of not stacked up on each other. So that's, and there's a relative kind of safety factor around the eyes, that non-coherent light is more divergent and it won't concentrate in the back of your eye and cause burns like a laser would.
Okay. And is it sort of relating or similar to the term analog?
Analog,
as in the waves, analog waves? Is that something different? I heard that to do with sound.
I'm not quite sure. I haven't heard analog being used to describe lights. No.
Oh, good. So the other thing I thought I'd mention is to clarify to people that we consider it a supplement to the sun, right? So all these beneficial wavelengths that are in red light therapy devices, we can get from the sun, but obviously depending on which part of the world you're in and what season it is and the weather on that particular day and the time of day.
Yeah, and that's a good way to look at it. It's kind of a very natural thing. We evolved under the sunlight for billions of years, or however long we've been on the planet, and all the organisms are tied in very tightly to the sunlight. And so, you can break it down. Different wavelengths might do different things for the body. So we've known for a long time how important vitamin D is with UV production. We know how blue light is important in certain contexts to keep us awake and keep us happy and stimulated. And then there's kind of a darker side to blue light, that if you have too much at night with your screens and your televisions, then that keeps you awake. So there's all these different biological interactions that we're learning about, and that's all covered under photobiomodulation, the studies. But a lot of the kind of clinical benefits come from that range of red and to near infrared. But it all kind of comes from the sun. And ideally, if you're having a great lifestyle and having plenty of sunlight and you're feeling great, then you might not need as much red light therapy as someone who's more indoors, that's dealing with certain conditions. Then that's where the therapy comes in.
Yeah. And I just wanted to cover another kind of beginner topic for people, is that the terminology. So there's red light therapy is the base term, which I think is the best way to describe it for most people. But when you're looking at scientific studies, there's low-level laser therapy, low-level light therapy, and photobiomodulation. Are those the only other three? Because I saw on your Instagram post today about photothermal therapy and photodynamic therapy as well.
Yeah, PDT and photothermal therapy, those are going to be a little bit more targeted therapies, where they're going after things like cancer cells. So you can use a photosensitizer, some sort of chemical or pigment that latches onto the cancer cell, and then you irradiate it with light, and that creates a ton of ROS, or something that kills the cancer cells. And so they're developing all these new techniques, thermally, it uses thermal action, or it uses photosensitizers to target certain areas. So there's a growing amount of research that's looking at different applications of light, because it is so effective, and because it's less invasive and it's easier to use.
And so another kind of beginner question that I think a lot of people might have is, what's the difference? I've done a YouTube video on this, but I think your answer will be better. What's the difference between a red light therapy device and just, I go to a hardware store and buy a red bulb? What's the difference?
Yeah, I mean, well, let's say you're buying a red coated LED. That's just going to be for general purposes, for lighting and things like that. So with red light therapy panels, we make them more focused. We're going to be directing the light towards the user, and you want to make sure you're measuring the proper amount of intensity is coming out of that light therapy light that gives you the benefits that you're looking for. A general light is going to be very low, much lower lux than a light therapy light, because the light therapy light has to deliver that much energy to get the response, the biological response that you're looking for.
Yeah, so it's like the power is the kind of main distinguishing factor among.
Yeah, I would look for the power, and then like a lot of generic red bulbs, are going to be 630 nanometers. Like if you can find a true red bulb and it's not just a coating, and then even if you get a red LED, then it's probably not going to have any infrared unless you purposely add in the near infrared. But they wouldn't do that in a hardware store
Yeah.
LED. So yeah, so it's the wavelengths. So making sure you have the right types of LEDs for the wavelengths, and then also the intensity, making sure you're powering it enough and you've got enough intensity there.
Yeah. And just before we go into those kind of aspects of a red light therapy device, different components to consider, what is, from what I understand, that the primary mechanism, I mean, there's multiple benefits to red light therapy, but the primary mechanism is for the ATP production in the mitochondria. That's like the main one, right?
That's what the primary explanation is, that the mitochondria have this cytochrome C oxidase CCO enzyme. That's the receptor. So photobiomodulation, you need a receptor for the wavelengths of light, and they found that the CCO seems to be the receptor, and that kickstarts. That's promotes the ATP production process, and makes your cell act a little bit more efficiently with more ATP. But there's all kinds of interesting mechanisms, like releasing more nitric oxide and improving circulation, and even producing some reactive oxygen species, some ROS, as kind of a signal for more healing and for things. So reactive oxygen species, sometimes we say, oh, all the toxins and all these things, you're overloaded with ROS. But if you do something like red light therapy or exercise or different types of therapy, you're actually using small amounts of ROS to trigger the healing response. So there's, and that's where kind of I've talked about sometimes the biphasic dose response. If you have too much red light therapy, just like if you have too much exercise, your cells will be overloaded and they won't be able to heal the way that you wanted it to, because you've done too much of that therapy. So that's the thing. You have to be mindful. Too much of anything gives you counterproductive results, or a lack of results. So you want to be right in the sweet spot sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So let's dive into these kind of different aspects or elements, if that's the right word. So I guess the first thing when you're looking at red light therapy devices, one of them is wavelength. What wavelengths of red or near infrared light is the device giving off? Is it emitting?
Mm-hmm.
And so what does that mean for a total beginner?
Yeah, I mean, so we talked about the spectrum. So the visible spectrum is about 400 nanometers. That's starting with the blue, violet, and all the way to red, ends at around 700. That's where visible red ends in nanometers. So that's kind of the spectrum. So if we're focusing in on more of the red, so the red wavelengths, a lot of times they study 630 nanometers, and that's a red. And if you look at an LED, maybe that's more of an orangey kind of red. And then 660 nanometers is another very popular wavelength, again with lasers and LEDs, and that'll be your deep red. And then you're going to cross into, there's not a lot of studies in the 700s, and that's where it's mostly starting to become invisible. You might see a faint glow from those LEDs. So there's not a lot of studies with 700, but there could be some benefits that we learn about in the future. And then we move into 810 nanometers, and that's a near infrared wavelength that they say is kind of one of the best wavelengths for penetration purposes, because it's right at a sweet spot of there's a, very good transmittance through the skin, and as you go further down or further up the nanometers in infrared, as you approach like 1,000 nanometers, it becomes a little bit more heating as you go along. So 810 or 808 is usually the laser equivalent. That's where it's really good penetration, and they like to study that brain benefits and for deeper tissue kind of benefits. So that's an exciting wavelength area. 830 is a really common wavelength used in a lot of studies as well. So that also has great benefits and great penetration. And then 850 is what we see in a lot of commercial red light therapy panels, and that's got a lot of good studies. And it just happens to be a very easily obtained LED because it's kind of mass produced for a lot of different industries. So that's a very beneficial wavelength, and it's we can mass produce it into LED panels and make them really affordable. But the list goes on. You can go up into 800s and 900s and even low thousands, and you'll see most of those are still with the laser studies, and you might want to use more techniques to try to reduce the thermal effects. But so usually we're going to talk in the 600s, mid 600s, and then the low 800s when we're looking at red light therapy devices, particularly the LED panels and such.
Yeah, and just to reiterate, with newbies, the 600 seems to be more for skin and shallow depth treatment, and
that's kind of the
800
general.
deeper.
Yeah, that's kind of the general thing. Like I don't want people to get too caught up with that because there are studies that use red 660 or 670 even for helping improve brain benefits and things like that. And you don't always have to. Red is very versatile. They're all very versatile wavelengths. So, there's good studies for penetration and systemic benefits as well, where you can target the forehead with a red wavelength, and it might not have much penetrating into the actual brain, but you're still improving circulation around the brain and warming up that area. And so you get a systemic benefit as well. So there's still a lot of great potential, but generally the marketing of these kind of simplifies it and says, yeah, you want red for skin level things like beauty and for kind of more gentle kind of treatment, and then the near infrared will be more suited for deeper penetration.
Cool. So that's wavelength. So the next one I have on the list is lux/brightness. Is that an interchangeable term, or should it just be called lux?
If you're talking about I would just use brightness or lux. Lux is kind of the visible, how our eyes interpret light, because we have our own spectrum for how our eyes interpret light. We actually are the most sensitive to light at 555 nanometers in the yellow, and that's why the sun kind of looks yellow because of our interpretation of the sun sometimes, and just things that are yellow kind of seem very bright to us and pop out at us. So as you get into deep red 660 nanometers and beyond, then lux is not very relevant because it's going to seem dim visibly, but it might still have a good irradiance. So like the lux of a near infrared bulb is always going to be zero, even though it could be having a very high intensity. The lux tells you about the visible interpretation of a wavelength. So it's good to know, because maybe you want lux as a light therapy more for circadian rhythms and for depression and SAD, the seasonal affective disorder. I just did a post about that today where I found an interesting study on how they're trying to use light therapies, not necessarily red, but just light therapy in general, to help break the cycle of diabetes and sleep disruption and depression. And it's all these things kind of play together. And if they can insert light therapy to help with enhance the mood and to strengthen the circadian rhythms, and then improve the sleep, and then you have better glucose control and all these things. So say you can have a very bright red light, so you can use that, I think, for similar purposes if you have something high brightness.
Okay. And then the next one I have is I'm not exactly sure whether these terms overlap, but intensity, power, and irradiance. Are they the same or slightly different?
I mean, yeah, you could. There's a slight difference because I think irradiance, the literal definition is more like the the power that's absorbed into a surface. Like if you go on the Wikipedia, like there's all these very subtle differences
Mm.
between things like irradiance and things like spectral flux and all these different terms you can look up. So, but we kind of use them pretty interchangeably and loosely to say irradiance and power density and all these things. We kind of use them kind of loosely just to say that's the power. You want to know the power output, so usually you use a standardized term like milliwatts per centimeter squared. And so a watt is a unit of power, and then the centimeter squared tells you kind of the normalized surface area per centimeter squared. This is the power that you're getting.
That's
um,
for the skin of the person using it, right?
Yeah,
Person.
yeah, and ideally you want to know the distance away from the light that you're targeting this
Yeah, we cover
treatment.
that
So
as well. Yeah.
yeah. But just for right now, yeah, you want to know the irradiance, and usually we use the term milliwatts per centimeter squared. And then I don't know if you want to talk about like the power of a device versus wattage and things like that too.
Yeah, yeah, let's go into that
Yeah.
as well.
So if you're shopping for a red light therapy panel, you have different powers. So you can have, I sell a panel that's 45 watts. That's the rated power of, if you combine all the maximum power outputs for all the LEDs, then that's 45 watts. But there are companies that have a 300-watt panel because they're using big 3-watt bulbs and a big array. And so you can use that to kind of help you guide of like what the relative irradiance is going to be. But I think the best way to know what your radiance is going to be is through testing the radiance itself, because there's a lot of other factors that get in the way. But you can use that power, the power, and you want to know the actual power that's consumed by the device as well. And usually the manufacturer will have to give you those details of how much power is their panel consuming, and how that might relate to the irradiance and the effectiveness.
Yeah, and then okay, so the next one we've got is flicker. So if it's my understanding, you want low to zero, if you can, zero flicker, because that's a slight stress on the body, particularly the eyes.
Yeah. I typically promote low flicker. So I've done some articles and a lot of posts about flicker, because I think it's an important topic. Um, we've known about flicker for a long time, ever since um, everyone changed their light bulbs from incandescent to fluorescence, and then people started getting headaches and people started getting nauseous, and productivity at work starts to decline. The same thing, we want to be mindful of red light therapy products. If we're doing especially red light therapy that's aimed at the face and aimed at the eyes, could that stress be causing the similar kind of stresses on your eyes? And so I prefer to avoid it and eliminate as much flicker as possible. The IEE says you want less than 9% flicker at 120 hertz, which is usually what the flicker rate is usually for us in the states. If you're on a 50 hertz um, voltage, 50 hertz grid, like I think you are, then it's going to be twice that. So it's going to be 100 hertz. But so in general, yeah, you want to watch out for flicker, especially if you're a little bit more sensitive to flicker. It seems like a lot of people don't really mind some flicker in the red light therapy panels too, and they could get along fine with it as long as you're not staring straight into the bulbs, and maybe it's a non-issue. So there's some debate about that, but overall, I think it's better safe than sorry, and just have no flicker.
Yeah, and I also think if you're using the red light therapy device just for red light therapy, like 15 minutes in the morning or something during the winter, it's still an issue then,
Hmm.
but less of an issue. But it's definitely more of an issue if you plan on using your red light therapy device as a like ambient light to light up your bedroom or light up the kitchen or whatever you're using it for, because then it's going to really add up the amount of flickering that your eyes are exposed to.
Correct. Yeah, that's the thing. It's like there's a nice dual purpose with red light therapy lights is you can leave them on and light up the room at night, so that way you have like a nice red light that's not disrupting your melatonin because there's no blue and there's no green. And so ideally you're not walking around in a flickering environment just before you go to bed because that could be a stress that stimulates you. So that's another great thing, and that's why I try to keep flicker very low in all my products so you can have that dual purpose that makes it more functional.
Yeah. The next one I had on the list was direction slash beam angle. Maybe they're separate, but could you talk a little bit about those components?
Yeah, especially, that's more like when you're designing a red light therapy device like I do, you want to know what the beam angle is because that'll tell you how focused and how narrow the light is being emitted from the LED. So, say a normal LED, you can get off the shelf is normally like 120 degrees. So it's a very wide, it spreads out, and that's like your hardware store, generic LED. It's just you just want to let it spread out and diffuse around the room. But again, for red light therapy, we want to focus that in. We want to narrow it in, so that way we get the intensity towards the user and make it more narrow and make it more concentrated, and so that makes it much more efficient for the therapy. And also, I did kind of a blog post about beam angle just to explore it. Is that we can see if a lot of the studies are based on lasers, and we know lasers are pretty much a straight beam, a very straight. They're almost parallel when the beam exits a laser. So that's like less than 1% beam angle. So if you want to try to keep things consistent and equivalent with the science, like then maybe you want a very narrow beam angle. But it's all kind of a trade-off of how wide do you want the beam to cover, of how much of the body do you want kind of covered by the beam, or do you just want to narrow it and focus to hit more of a smaller target. So that's to me it's more, there's not a lot of studies that say, oh, we studied one beam angle versus another beam angle. there's
Mm.
there's no there's no true studies like that, so it's all kind of like, how do we use beam angle for the best application, without any literal studies to tell us what's best.
Sweet, sweet. Yeah, that makes sense. A little bit related to that, the next element I have here is so the distance that the user is from their red light therapy device. Obviously, that will also determine, its relationship with the
Hmm.
irradiance and other things and the beam angle, like you just mentioned.
Yeah, and that's the thing. As you get further away from the light, the light is diverging and spreading out, and so that's actually decreasing the irradiance. That's decreasing your power density the further you go. So, um, a lot of the early devices that came to market, a lot of the LEDs and the lasers, they just pressed right into the skin. They use contact method, and they just pressed right into the skin. So there's no question you're not losing any power with distance. And so that's kind of the simplest way to go. And now we have more higher powered panels, and a lot of people are concerned about EMFs.
Mm.
And so a lot of manufacturers are saying, hey, if you stand 6 inches away, you're going to be outside of the EMF magnetic field. And it'll be, if you're concerned about the EMFs, then you need to stand at least 6 inches away from certain types of lights. And that's where that 6 inch kind of thing came from, of like, okay, stand 6 inches away. But you still want to know the intensity at that distance. So the manufacturer should provide that intensity and say, okay, you're standing a little bit further away. Here's the intensity. Here's how long is it a reasonable dose, and you're good to go. So as long as and then you can use that if they say, hey, if you want to stand 12 inches away versus 24 inches away, here's the difference in irradiance, because sometimes lower and slower treatments are better.
Oh, okay.
you know kind of like we said, like you want a gentler treatment for skin, but maybe if you want a little bit deeper and more intensity and more kind of warming kind of effect, you might be closer for higher intensity, and that might be more for getting more circulation and workout and fitness and things like that. So you can use this. Sometimes you can use distance to your advantage to um, control your dosage and kind of play around with modulating your intensity for different purposes.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. That definitely doesn't get talked about enough. That that you could actually have a better situation for particular people going longer and lower or and a further distance. That could be better for some people.
Yeah, and that's sometimes I come across interesting studies where it's like the time is an important variable and not just the dose. And because they kind of say, okay, we have two intensities. Say we have 100 milliwatts versus 50 milliwatts per centimeter squared, and they found like one of the studies I found was like it didn't really matter. They both got good results as long as you did it for 10 minutes. And so the time was an important factor. If you do a very short treatment and you say, oh, I got an equivalent dosage because I did a high intensity for a shorter amount of time, that doesn't always work. You can't just do some math and tell your body, oh, I just got a big dose, so you should be good to go. You can't trick your body with some math. So sometimes, getting the right amount of time is just as important as your dose and your intensity. Where time, I want people to think of time as an independent factor. So like maybe at least 10 minutes to get that therapeutic response. You're just trying to send a signal to your body and to your cells, and that signal gets kind of turned on at like let's say the 10-minute mark. So that's a kind of another consideration, adds another layer of considerations, not just dose and intensity like a lot of people talk about.
Yeah, yeah, and just to go back onto that topic of EMF, it's my understanding that there's kind of four main types of EMF for anyone completely new to it. There's electric fields, magnetic fields, RF radiation. So that's like your Wi-Fi router, your phone, and then there's dirty electricity. And with red light therapy, we're not concerned with RF radiation. There's no wireless tech involved, unless some of them actually do have.
Mm-hmm.
They might have Bluetooth components, which is obviously not a good thing. But we're mainly concerned with electric fields and magnetic fields. Is that correct?
I would say that's correct. But like you said, a lot of newer ones come with the Bluetooth or the Wi-Fi capability, so you can control it on your phone.
Yeah,
So
really
so
unfortunate.
yeah, so I mean, maybe you can disable that functionality or just try to find lights that are. I'm more of a bare bones kind of guy. I just don't do that extra stuff. Um, so RF could be also RF could be a thing if you're getting cheap lights from China, because when you're converting the AC to the DC, like we do inside all of our lights, we have a power driver that converts AC to DC. You can create RF as a by accident. It's not sending signals, but you create a ton of RF, and so the FCC sometimes finds grow light manufacturers like marijuana, illegal marijuana people, by finding them through their radio waves that they're emitting from their high EMF lights. So you do have to watch out every once in a while. If you get a cheap knockoff, you could get to high RF. Um, but anyway, so that aside, yeah, we want to look at the electric field and the magnetic field. Electric field is, I found after some trial and error, it's pretty easy to control as long as the panel is grounded. So it's got a three prong, it's got that third prong and it's grounded internally, or a lot of the metal panels on the market, that metal casing will be grounded. And so that'll keep the electric field pretty low. And then the magnetic field, that sometimes depends on how powerful your light is, just again as a response of having to convert so much power in the drivers. And then a lot of times they introduce cooling fans to keep the panel cooled, and that causes some magnetic field as well. So again, the magnetic field drops off pretty significantly after 6 inches. So That's pretty key. Or some of my products like my my lower power 45-watt panels that are kind of like my bigger selling product. They're very low EMF because they're lower powered and they don't have fans. They're very low in magnetic field. So that's the kind of thing. If you're designing a light, sometimes you can trade off. You can go lower power and then you'll have lower EMF, and then you can use it closer to the skin. It makes things a lot simpler. Um, so, and you talked about, there is dirty electricity whenever you plug in an appliance. There could be some dirty electricity. So, while you're using it, it could be sending, it's sending some of that dirty electricity down through your ground and into your circuit system. So that's another
But
consideration.
with the dirty electricity, it's sort of I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but it's not like the fault or responsibility kind of the red light therapy company. That's more like your area and what you need to get, like Stetzer filters or green wave filters, and put them into your home.
Yeah, I think that's the best way. I think when I think we both heard Matt Blackburn's podcast with Stetzer, and you could do some fancy stuff to try to filter it before it gets into your system, but that's a lot of extra effort. It's probably better just to get a Stetzer filter, and again, you're not going to leave your red light device on all night, so you don't have to worry. Once you turn it off, you don't have to worry about the dirty electricity. So
Sweet. And the last component to off this list that I wanted to quickly go through before we get into your products and your company and some other things that have been going on is, I mean, all red light therapy devices that are on the marketplace for ordinary consumers, they're all LED, aren't they? There are no laser ones available for the standard market.
I
Haven't
think
seen any.
as far as I know, most of the laser ones, they have to go more through the FDA approval and more a lot more professionals have to get trained on it and have to use it properly. Consumers can get their hands on lasers for sure, but just for accessibility and for cost reasons, most people aren't going to get a laser. They're probably going to go for an LED.
And there's no other option other than LED, is there, or laser?
There's we've talked in the past a few times about heat lamps
Yeah.
where you can get a high powered red heat lamp, with it's an incandescent bulb with a red coating on it, and some people prefer incandescent for EMF reasons and flicker reasons as well. Um, but I don't think that's as much of an issue because, like I said, you can ground out your LEDs and you can reduce the flicker pretty low. But anyway, so you can get a heat lamp, and that offers some small percentage in the range that we talked about in the 600 to 800 range. And like I said, there's still benefits from 800 to 1,000 and 1,000 plus. But with the heat lamp, you're getting a lot of the heating wavelengths, and so that kind of transforms into more of a thermal and warming kind of process. So the science of photobiomodulation is pretty strictly non-thermal. So you're not going to find any studies that use heat lamps and call them that's photobiomodulation. There's certainly some crossover of benefits and crossover of the wavelengths, but it's just not we don't have as much science of using the heat lamps. There's some, but it's mostly with the lasers and LEDs. But the photobiomodulation studies, they're kind of open to any broadband wave source. So if you can filter out the heating wavelengths of an incandescent bulb, then that's still, uh, uh, photobiomodulation. If you can filter out the heating effects. So that is a possibility, especially it's a budget friendly one and it's a great alternative for some heating. So that's the only other one that I'm aware of.
Cool. So let's get into your company, Gemba Red. It's a very unique name, and you've got a website which I encourage people to go check out. Even if you're not interested in buying for whatever reason, the blog posts are very informative. So there's a lot of good information there. But How did you come to starting Gemba Red? I think it was probably 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah. I started 2 years ago in January, so it's just about 2 years ago now. And you know, I was living in China for the 6 months prior, and I was I wander around and I go to electronics markets, and I was like, wow, there's a lot of LEDs here. I could kind of hook up with a manufacturer, and at the time I was going to the bulletproof conferences and I was part of these Facebook groups, and everyone was complaining like there's only two companies out there that are making red light panels. They're all like really expensive, and people didn't know what to do. And I was like, well, I'm here in China where they're all being made. Maybe I can figure something out. And that's what I did. I did what I do as an engineer, that I've done for industries, and I've worked in hydrogen fuel cells and automotive industry and printed circuit boards and all these different industries. I just said, hey, I'm going to go source some light panels and see how that goes. So that's what I did. I gave them the wavelengths I wanted. I gave them kind of the specifications, and we found kind of a simple kind of layout to put it in, and that's how I got started. And I inserted myself, and I was a lot cheaper than my competitors, and it kind of took off from there. And also with the development of the Gemba Red, after just a few months, I was able to significantly reduce the EMFs from my first product, and that also gave me some more kind of acclaim that I was working and trying to engineer these products to be safer and more effective and still affordable. So that's kind of been my mission over these past few years: is how do we make practical and affordable red light therapy products, that people can access and understand and give the science behind, and get into that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think like there's two things out of that I want to mention. The first is that you're really someone who has a qualified background to be going into all the details about this and the EMF and all the stuff because of your personal background, which is great, and also your sort of drive mission to get it make red light therapy more affordable is also really good, and I'm so super supportive of that because if we want to fix society in terms of we've got blue light everywhere, white bright light everywhere, flicker everywhere, we're going to need to get red light therapy mainstream, and it's not going to get adopted if it's too pricey. We don't want it to stay with some sort of niche thing that only people with connections and a lot of wealth can get into. We want it to go mainstream, and you're supporting that, which I think is really awesome.
Yeah, and I think that's like the education component as well. We need to educate people about these terms, let them know about EMF, let them know about flicker, and then they can demand higher quality products from if you go to your hardware store and you say, "Hey, all these light bulbs are flickering, I'm not going to buy it." And that's going to send a signal to all the manufacturers downstream to improve their quality and make it safer and better for everyone.
Cool. So let's go through some of the products you've got. You've got the strip light. So let's cover that. It's kind of a quick one to get in first. It's basically a night light, ambient red light. I've got a couple of those and just use them to keep the room bright at night.
Yeah, I was just like, how do I make a really cheap, low flicker red ambient light, especially since I noticed a lot of people using my panels as night lights, and I was like, that's kind of an expensive night light. Let's see if I can make something more practical if you're just using it for light at night. So I came out with some strip lights. They're USB powered, and that means you can plug it into any um, old phone adapter or USB port, and it's kind of pretty much a universal kind of thing. So you can plug it in anywhere. And I take some with me on my travels. I'm in a hotel room right now. I have two, one on each side of my bed. And then I also have what I call the Gemba Red Crane, and so that's more of a reading light. So you can kind of aim it at your books that you're reading, or aim it at whatever task you're doing at night, for if you're studying at night or doing things. But I think the Rave is like a really just cheap, simple biohack just to have, these things kind of laying around, giving you some ambient light. And a lot of people, they want to switch out their light bulbs, their overhead light bulbs with red lights. And I found that's like too stimulating because it's like I want, if you want to simulate like a campfire or simulate like a sunset,
Mm.
then that's going to be lower on the horizon. That's going to be low on the ground. So if you have overhead lights that you've swapped out with red, that's like a little too much for me. That's like still telling you that there's a sun over your head. Um,
And
so I like to,
it's also
yeah.
like it's direct to the body, like there's nothing in between. So like when I set up red light bulbs at home, I mean sometimes I do put them in
Hmm.
the ceiling. I don't think that that's not the end of the world, obviously, but
Yeah.
I think it's more optimal to like some of the ones I have them on lamps. I just point them at the wall, so it's bouncing off the wall to the rest of the room. So I'm not getting hit directly with it, and it makes it
Mhm.
more like just calmer,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a good way to go. So yeah, that's I wanted to venture into some strip lights and some general nightlight solutions, especially because I just don't see there's a lot of companies doing low blue lights and doing amber lights, but no one other than me has gotten too deep into just pure red for nighttime. So I was trying to do that.
The other cool products you have here before we get into like the panels where there's kind of the most interest, you've got these t-shirts. This is such an interesting idea. Can you tell us a bit about?
Yeah, I mean I've gotten into these are infrared textiles, infrared emitting textiles, and all they do is they take your own body heat, and your body's heat is warmth, and it's a form of infrared. Like I just went in for a thermography session, so they took the scans of my body and they'll show me. They're going to do a report of if I have inflammation, then you have hot spots. But anyway, so the shirt takes your own body warmth, and then it re-emits you because it's got microparticles inside the fiber themselves, and that'll re-emit it back to me as far infrared. So it's the far infrared red waves. So it helps keep your body warm. It helps with circulation. This company, I didn't develop these fibers. I'm kind of approved. I'm certified to use. It's from a company called Emana, EMANA, and they developed this, and they've done studies with this. So this is like a really really neat technology that I just want to get my hands on and try to spread to more people. And so far, yeah, I've gotten really great feedback about them. It's just for me, I'm kind of like, well, the clothing industry seems pretty rough, like in terms of like trying to market that. That's a whole different. I think that's a whole different set of marketing of like, can you envision yourself wearing this piece of clothing, and is it valuable? But if you kind of see the functional aspects of it, and you can wear it as an undershirt, and you can wear it to bed, it's just got a really gentle way of adding more far infrared wavelengths to your life.
Yeah, I think, I mean, definitely if you're into all this stuff and you're living Northern Europe, Canada,
Hmm.
somewhere very far away from the equator in winter, I think it makes total sense to have something like that underneath. It would be very advantageous. So there's that, which is awesome. And then you've
Hmm.
got these groove panels. So they're sort of like a square red light therapy panel.
Yeah, that's my first panel is the groove. I call it the groove panel. It's a 1 foot by 1 foot square. It's only I think it's like 2.5 to 3 pounds, so it's a very lightweight for the size. And so you can rest that right on your skin of whatever you're targeting. It covers like a good part of the chest or the stomach, or you can lay it on your back. Or I like to prop it up on a chair behind me while I'm sitting on a couch or working on my computer, or even an office chair fits nicely in that. And you can get it right on your lower back and adrenals and kidneys. So that's what I launched with. It's a fantastic product. That's what most of my kind of I have a few influencers that promoted me since early on, and that's the product they have. Um, and then I came out with a variant of that called the Rex, and that includes, oh, well, I'll say the Groove includes three wavelengths of LEDs. It's got 630 nanometers, 660, and 850. And so those are three really nice. It's they're all in an equal ratio, so it's 2/3 red and 1/3 infrared. And it's a nice blend. So you can use it for multiple purposes. Kind of like we said, you have more of the surface level stuff, and you can have um, more of the deeper penetration with the near infrared. So it's very versatile and very very simple and easy to use. Um, Lightweight, and you can see I have a little YouTube video on how I just kind of lay it down and use it sometimes. Um, yeah, and then my next product was the Rex, which is a variant kind of on the Groove. It's the same size, 1 foot by 1 foot. Also very lightweight, low EMF. You can use it near the skin, but this time it's got more near infrared bulbs. It's got a fourth wavelength of 830 nanometers. So it's got four wavelengths. And so I introduced that, I want to say late 2018, early 2019, so early last year. And that quickly became a very popular product because it seems like a lot of people just kind of want more wavelengths, just to cover more of a broader application of which wavelengths can do which. A lot of people, an average consumer, doesn't know specifically what they're treating, or maybe you just want to cover things for general purpose. So why not just get more wavelengths?
Yeah.
Seems to be the general feeling. So everyone kind of, I I think if I do future products, I'll just try to cram in as many wavelengths as I can, because that seems to be what people are looking for.
Yeah, and then you have this other really cool one here. You got a lot of innovative products. The Mend that so that can wrap around someone's arm
Mm-hmm.
or part of the body,
Yeah,
which
I
means you
dabbled.
don't lost, do you?
It means what?
It means you don't have any like loss because it's direct to
Yeah.
your skin. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So you can wrap it around. I find it's great for limbs and arms, and wrapping around a leg or a foot or things like that. So I think it's great for that. And some people just don't want a rigid panel at all. Like, I've just found some people who are like, no, I don't like panels, but I like a soft, like, it's just nice. It's comfortable. It's easy, it's easy to use, flex around. It makes more sense to have something that's not as clunky. So a lot of people like that. I'm not sure. It's definitely harder to manufacture than a rigid panel for a lot of reasons. So, but it was definitely a very good learning experience for me to produce these panels, and it's really nice because as far as EMFs go, um, the power adapter is external to the pad. And so that means there's no EMFs on the pad itself. So it's a pure DC. There's no flicker. There's practically no EMF. So that's my lowest EMF product. And that's the thing is I've learned a lot. And it's like, okay, if we can start to make panels the same way with the power adapter or the power drivers external to the panels and pads, then you can start to even drive the EMFs even further lower in these products. So it's definitely again, I try to educate people of what I'm learning, and maybe someone smarter than me can make mass produced pads that are low EMF. But I found different adapters have different levels of EMF, so yeah, I had to still find like a really nice shielded and grounded adapter.
Yeah, I think that's really cool to have that one because it, like you say, it doesn't need it's not a big chunky panel. Because I've traveled
Mm-hmm.
with red light therapy devices, and I was real worried that it would, get smashed around when they, take it through customs and,
Yeah.
damage people. So, but whereas this one, that's not going to be an issue at all. You just put it between some clothes and you're
Yeah, it
good.
just folds right up. It's pretty nice. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you've got these, full body panels that look really, really nice. Could you tell us a bit about those?
Yeah. So I finally ventured, against my better judgment, to make full body panels, and I had a lot of trouble, like I said, getting the EMFs down, getting the flicker down. They're just big, high powered beasts that I made so many different prototypes, and I said, no, this one's got too much flicker. No, this one's got too much EMF. And we kept tweaking it and redesigning it. And so I finally came out with one near the end of last year, the end of 2019. And I said, finally, Gemba Red's got a full body panel. The wait's over. And here it is. It had 3 wavelengths, unlike, most full body panels only have 2 wavelengths at the 630, the 660, and 850. I get everything professionally measured, which, we can talk about that. But so that way you can, like I said, you can accurately dose it. And I give the irradiances at different distances so you can have that control of if you want more or less intensity, depending on what you're trying to do. So I had all that laid out. But unfortunately, maybe, I did a kind of a soft launch, and then I announced it around, I officially announced it around Black Friday, November 26th or so, the big shopping holiday in the US. And so, I was announcing it then. And then, it was only, maybe a month later, I got a letter from Juve's lawyer saying, hey, we think that you're possibly infringing on a pending patent that we have on this category of light. And so they said this what I call the Gemba Red Oomph body light. They said, hey, we take issue to this. It looks like it's infringing on our patents. Here's where we think it's infringing on the hanging apparatus, on having a pulley kind of system that you can adjust, on that it's a red light therapy instruments. It's got a hollow body and it's got wavelengths between 600 and 900 nanometers, and it's all kind of listed out in their patent application. So this is a published patent application. It's you can find it on Google Patents or whatever, and it is still pending. So as far as I understand, and talking to some other people, they kind of say, hey, the patent's still pending. They can't technically enforce what they've said to you, but if it does get approved, then it could become a problem, right? So it's kind of like I decided, hey, it's not worth messing around with patents. I want to respect the patent process. If somebody gets approved for a patent, then that's normal business. Companies, I've worked in engineering companies. We have to patent things. We have to protect our intellectual property. We have to, and you have to enforce it. So if they know there's potentially people out there, potentially infringing on their patents, then they have an obligation to tell all these competitors, and including me, and say, hey, we think you could be infringing on our patent. We don't want you to do that because we need to control our patent. And so that's a normal business process. And I said, okay, I'm going to give it up for now until I learn more about this patent process and get some more advice. And it's kind of the best way. But what I did was I announced it to all my followers. I said, hey, I got to pull this product. I got this letter. I got this letter from Juve. I don't want to mess around. So I announced it to everyone. There was it went a little bit more viral than I expected. And a lot of people were like really shocked. And we talked a little bit earlier. People don't understand. It's like, oh, Gemba Red's getting sued, or all these people. Oh, Gemba. And it's like, no, I'm not getting sued, but we were notified of the patent issue, and we're gonna lay low and not do that. So I discontinue the product. I don't have any more of the body lights anymore, and don't plan on making any anytime soon. And so that's it. So it caused quite a ruckus, and I think it could be, it's an interesting thing because now there are a lot of panels on the market that look very similar, and it's kind of like, well, what's going to happen to all these companies? I didn't rely on that body light, so it didn't. I don't need it to sustain my business. I think my Gemba Red Groove and Gemba Red Rex are still my most popular panels, and they're really great. But yeah, a lot of other companies have made, if you read how general and broad this patent is, a lot of other companies could be having a similar issue right now. And only a few. I've talked to a few of them, and they're all trying to figure out their own ways of dealing with this patent situation.
Yeah, and you mentioned it's quite broad because that does make it a little bit kind of difficult for people to try and make an adjustment, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It's like, well, maybe you have to come up with a new way to hang it, or some novel way of standing it upright so people can still stand in front of it. But it's like one of those things. It's like, well, maybe this will drive some more innovation. Because I just talked to someone yesterday that was like, it'd be nice is like a panel you can just lay on the floor and lay next to it. That's more like a lot of people do that anyway with their body lights because they don't want to hang it and they don't want to stand. And sometimes it doesn't even make sense. If you're sick or if you have knee problems or back problems, you don't want to stand in front of a panel for 20 minutes a day. So maybe we do need to redesign panels that are better for sitting in front of or better to lay down in front of, and help to create more options in the market rather than I think there's been a lack of creativity in the market for the past few years too, where everyone's just kind of making all these light panels that all kind of look very similar and serve similar purposes, and the only differences between all these panels on the market are, oh, one's got more intensity. Oh, one might have more or less flicker and more or less EMF, but they're all kind of structurally the same
Yeah,
function.
I
So
think having wheels on them, I don't know how practical that is, could be useful in some situations. But
yeah, yeah.
how old is this patent? What is there something about that?
The date, I think that the earliest date I read on it was February. Uh, I forget. I want to say 2016, and so
Wow.
was it 2016 or no 2017? Let me pull it up. Let me make sure I got this right. 2017, yeah. So it was applied, or it became public. I'm not sure the exact process, but it says here was February 2017. And so, yeah, that is 3 years ago. And, the patent process can take a long time. So it could take a few years for the patent office to actually review it and grant it. So that's the kind of thing is like, are we going to wait around and see if eventually that gets approved? I don't think it's worth kind of messing around with that whole process until I can talk to more of a lawyer type about it.
Yeah, yeah. Can it just stay pending for like 5 years or more?
I'm not sure. I think eventually like it gets reviewed and maybe they send sometimes there's a review process, and if the US Patent Office says something, they can say, "Oh, no, these claims are too broad." Like we said, "Oh, these claims are too broad. You need to tighten it up." Or, "Oh, you need to change this or that because there's already something out there on the market." So yeah, I really don't know how long the time can go, and I think you can keep this process alive as long as you keep tweaking your application and trying to resubmit until you finally get something.
Hmm. Okay. And so let's go through some kind of not necessarily debunking, but kind of quality control and things that you've written blog posts about in terms of claims that people make. You do third party testing. You've also I can't remember exactly what it was, but you made a post about using like a crystal ball, like a glass ball,
Yeah.
or to show to show like irradiance and things like that. Could you talk a bit
Mhm.
about some of those?
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, I like kind of playing around, but one of the first things when I launched my product was like, again, I go back to my engineering training of like, how do you properly measure things? Like, especially like I was making components that go into aerospace and components that go into automobiles. You really can't mess around if you're measuring something wrong and they put it into an automobile and then there's a massive recall because you messed something up. And so I was like, okay, I got to find a third party testing lab. That way they have the right testing tool, calibrated tools, and it eliminates my bias from the measurements. So if I measure my own products, that's a conflict of interest. Of course, I'm going to try to inflate my own measurements. That happens. I can't even trust myself, even though I think I'm a good person. I subconsciously want my intensity to be really high because it'll help me sell more units. So I might subconsciously lean a little bit forward while I'm taking my measurement and say, "Oh, well, okay, here's a good number." So you can't trust yourself. So even if I bought the best instrumentation in the world, it's still not proper to measure your own equipment. It's and that's and it happens all the time. It happens with the CPD industry. It happens with all these people. Once you send things out to third party labs, you find it's rarely what they advertise, and that's what I keep finding with the red light therapy industry is that um, unfortunately there's these cheap solar power meters on the market that are used um, to understand the solar irradiance, especially when you're setting up like solar panels and for powering houses and things. Um, you use these solar radiance meters, but they're not properly calibrated for the red and infrared wavelengths of LEDs that we've talked about, and it tends to read falsely high by an order of twice as high. So I see this all the time. All these different companies have taken measurements on solar power meters. They I mean, at this point, the numbers don't even make sense to me because the numbers they're advertising would be rather hot. You would feel it as heat. Like it just doesn't make sense to me. Um, so it can't be true. You have to use some logic when you're interpreting results. And again, if you're biased, you're going to ignore the logic and just say, "Oh wow, I've got 100 milliwatts per centimeter square at 6 inches," when it's not a properly calibrated measurement method. So that's why. So I send everything out, and I get them tested, and I've written blog posts about all these discrepancies and what the root cause of all this is, and I'm trying to get more and more people involved and on board with, hey, we need to push to get these numbers straightened out, so that way we can at least we're biohackers, and the dosages on how to use these things aren't particularly clear right now. So a lot of people say, "How long should I use my light? What's the dosage?" And we can't compare apples to apples until everyone's talking the same the same thing in terms of irradiance and getting things measured, and we're all using similar calibrated equipment to get these numbers. And then we'll have a huge body of evidence of all these consumers over the past 5 years that are using red light panels. Then we can say, with more distinction, okay, I use this much power for so much time, and because everything's calibrated, I understand it now, and that's what we can go by. So it's like, to me, you can't correlate it to the science where there's thousands of studies on red light therapy. We can't correlate all these new panels on the market that are self-reporting based on improper measurement tools. So it's really frustrating to me because I'm like, well, I don't want to participate in these improper measurements. I'd rather just re-educate everyone the right way to do things. So um, so I think that's huge. And then I do different experiments on my blog. I use a crystal ball, which acts as a focusing lens, and you can hold it in front of your red light or things like that, and you can see how it narrows down the focus. So I thought that would be a clever hack. If you have to stand 6 inches away from your light panel anyway, you could use the crystal ball in between you and your panel to help magnify the intensity to a narrow spot, and again help to simulate more of like the laser type focus that you would
Yeah.
get, and possibly get more localized intensity, and you can kind of hold it up to different spots and see how that works. And I just I get excited about testing different things and seeing how the interactions work.
Yeah, so you're pro, standardization of the measurements so that I guess for the consumer's sake, and also so that the industry can get taken up by, more of the population.
Yeah, I think it'll help with correlating everything to the science, help with helping the consumer understand what they're doing and how to do it properly and safely. So it just makes more sense to just get things done the right way.
Yeah.
So
And also, let's talk about one other kind of myth that's out there. Well, I don't know if it's a myth or not, but I heard in your other podcast that you haven't heard any evidence of this. Did you find any evidence for the claim that, triple testosterone? Because I've used red light therapy. I've also just used the sun,
mhm.
but there's this claim that kind of gets pushed around. But you
Yeah,
mentioned
so
in that you hadn't actually heard any evidence for that.
yeah, so again, a lot of this comes back to there was a Men's Health article 2 or 3 years ago. Ben Greenfield wrote on how he improved his testosterone, and actually even earlier than that was Red Light Man. He had a blog post on how it triples testosterone, and that's the title of his article. And so there's kind of a lot of anecdotal positive evidence, and a lot of I hear different people say, hey, yeah, it feels great, I've tested my testosterone before and after, but there's really not enough human evidence in a clinical setting to say that it triples testosterone or that improves testosterone. And again, I can anecdotally say, hey, it feels good for me. I feel like I get better blood flow if nothing else. um so that's a benefit, but otherwise it's again, there's a lot of slippery slopes with how many medical claims you can make about your products, and what's right and what's wrong. And so I have to kind of be more moderate with my claims and just kind of make more general statements. And I think for now, testosterone is not something with enough evidence to back up that I can make that claim. Again, if there's an anecdote or an influencer that says, "Hey, I tripled my testosterone and here's the results," well, then that's one anecdote and that's great. And that's what biohackers do, the N=1 studies where you test things out and you share your results. But it's still early to kind of jump all over that. And like you said, you can go out in the sun. Bright light helps sink in. The sunlight and bright light helps anchor your circadian rhythm. It helps anchor your hormone production, helps you with your sleep, and then systemically that's going to help you with things like testosterone and human growth hormone and all these things. So if you can get sunlight, vitamin D, have a strong circadian rhythm, then naturally you'll be on the path to better health and lead to good things like testosterone. So it's not a stretch of the mind to say,
No.
hey, yeah, certainly it could be good, but it's definitely something to watch out for too many claims on products.
Yeah, it has to be kind of balanced, I think. I mean, there's a fine line. You want to attract people to this new awesome therapy, which it is awesome, but you
Mm-hmm.
also extreme claims that just ridiculously extreme claims, then that actually lets people down and gives them kind of a negative experience, maybe, or they might feel like, oh, so it's not actually the case. And so, yeah, it's kind of a balancing act. Now, I think, if you just said it's good for your testosterone, there's pretty much a lot of people would be able to support that than
Mm-hmm.
saying it's going to triple it.
Right. Yeah. So it's, yeah. No, it's interesting. And there's so much potential with red light therapy. They're starting to study it for brain health and for gut health and all these interesting things. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. Keep checking up on the studies and seeing where the studies go.
Yeah. Cool. Some questions I had from the audience. One of them was, can I DIY a red light panel? I think you had an article about this using Alibaba or
Yeah, I
AliExpress.
mean, you can DIY it in different levels. If you can find some cheap factory in Alibaba, or Amazon starting to get flooded with things, and eBay is starting to get red light bulbs and red light panels too. But to me, it's kind of a roulette or
Russian
a
roulette.
grab.
Yeah.
It's like a grab bag. It's like, how are you going to know if the flicker is good, if the intensity is probably not going to be measured properly, the EMFs might not be measured, and a lot of times these companies don't care. They'll claim, oh, we have low EMF and low this and low that, but I think it's Russian roulette. And I've tested some panels that on my YouTube channel, and I say, I tested them. They turn out to be wicked high magnetic field for no obvious reason to me, and I'm like, why are these so high? Um, so it is, yeah. So it's kind of a grab bag, but again, if you're not concerned about flicker and EMF, then maybe that's the way to get started. You can also, order some red and near infrared bulbs and wire them up yourselves. And there's some guy has a YouTube video on that. You can just order a bag full of LEDs and wire them up and get them power driven. And I've been tinkering around with that myself to make more custom kind of setups for myself. Um, so yeah, it all depends on your level of. At the end of the day, you're still investing some money and some time into
Yeah.
it. And then it's like, are you going to also buy all the testing equipment yourself?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, at that point, just buy something from Gimbared and
Yeah, it doesn't
save
make any
yourself the
sense to try to
hassle.
do that.
So yeah, no, it's possible, but that's why, yeah, eventually, people will start testing more and more from Alibaba, and again, we'll have to start demanding all these cheap companies to get on board with low flicker and low EMF, and then eventually, yeah, maybe there'll be some really cheap stuff coming straight from China.
Yeah, exactly. I think, yeah. And so another question I had here, because I kind of interact with the kind of primal carnivore type people quite a bit on Instagram, and one of them asked me, but this is unnatural. These red LEDs, this is totally unnatural. How could this be therapeutic? So there's that component. I messaged you about this, but I think it'd be good for the
Yeah.
audience. And also, a flip side to that is, could you make a natural red light therapy device as like a bonfire? Could it work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, for the first thing, it's like, it's kind of like there's a lot of unnatural things in our environment these days, and it's like you're using red wavelengths. Like right now, I've got a Gemba Red Beam. We didn't discuss that one. It's one of the most narrow beam angle lights in the market, and I've got it 4 feet away from me, and so it's really low, and it's low flicker, it's low EMF, and 4 feet away, there's literally no EMF, coming to me, and I would argue that's pretty natural. And sometimes you use therapy. Part of the point of a therapy is that it is unnatural. Sometimes we drink MCT oil to get a brain boost, but why don't you just eat raw coconut meat? So we concentrate different things. We use vitamins and we use far infrared saunas, and we use all these biohacks. I think that's kind of the point, is if you can concentrate it into a therapeutic purpose, and hey, you only have to use this 15 or 20 minutes a day, then that's kind of the targeted therapy. If you know you're not meant to live under an artificial LED light your whole life, but if you can kind of supplement where you need it and do it responsibly, then that's the way to go. And eventually, try to work yourself into having more natural lights and more sunlight and things like that. We talked about the campfire. I think it's also a similar spectrum to like the heat lamps we talked about earlier. You're still getting a lot of the heat, and heat is very beneficial, and campfires feel great when you're sitting around them. And it's a natural thing to have campfires and candles and things, helps you go to sleep. And I was just talking to someone about, she was asking me, she was like, hey, I use a red light at night. Doesn't that disrupt my sleep cycle because it's a bright light? And I was like, well, there might be a duality to using red lights, because we're used to sitting around a campfire at night, and that kind of helps stimulate the melatonin process. It kind of tells us it's nighttime, and maybe that there's kind of a dual purpose of having a red light at night. And that's the kind of thing. If you can have more campfires and things like that, then that's great. But I think it's still more of the heating wavelengths, and it's nice. I can sit under this non-thermal red LED light for a very long time and not get overheated, and tolerate it very well. But I wouldn't be able to tolerate a heat lamp or a campfire for an extremely long amount of time, because that you just kind of warm up and lose interest in it.
Yeah. And so another kind of clear cut reason why it might not be as good is that with a big fire, even if you say you took your t-shirt off, there's not enough irradiance? Is that with that? And there's also the distance. You're not going to be able to get close enough to have the concentrated dose like per centimeter
Yeah.
squared, right?
I think it would be hard to focus the heat and the intensity of the fire towards yourself unless you're inside one of those campfire based saunas or something like that. You like
Oh yeah,
it's
yeah.
hard to really focus that campfire benefit towards you for the heat effect, unless you designed like a little sweat lodge or hut around it. But so yeah, I think it's hard to do, but certainly low doses of campfires and things like that. Those are great and beneficial in their own ways, but it's not necessarily equivalent to the science of photobiomodulation.
Yeah, I think just with regard to the first part, like we're living on an unnatural planet at the moment.
Hmm.
A lot of pollution's happened. Hundreds and thousands of different kinds of pollution. To just be picky on this one thing and be like, oh, I'm not going to do it because it's unnatural. It doesn't
Yeah,
make sense. I mean,
right.
everything else that's happening to you is kind of unnatural as well, and especially red light therapy, something that's been researched so thoroughly. You could compared to other things. So.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, where one of the forms of pollution is blue light pollution and artificial light pollution, and it's nice to have red lights because a lot of our lights in our modern society are devoid of red, they're devoid of near infrared. So if you can have more of these healing wavelengths because you've spent all day indoors and at your workplace and it's been devoid of red and infrared for so long, it's nice to come home and have these healing wavelengths to kind of counteract that. But again, if you live a perfectly outdoor lifestyle and you're feeling fine and fit and you don't have any artificial lights to begin with, then I guess eventually you could make an argument of, yeah, I don't do any electronics and I just kind of live in harmony with nature. But
Mm.
it's hard, it's hard to see that side of the argument.
Yeah, yeah. I guess two last questions. So one is, like, because I think that a lot of people, if they don't get involved with red light therapy for whatever reason, they should definitely, at the very least, just get some red light in their life. So, like an ambient red light, so it's like a red bulb, incandescent, whatever, because then you're at least balancing out the blue, which you've been smashed with basically for your whole life. So, what would be your best recommendations for ambient red light?
Yeah, and I would say even a cheaper alternative with that's lower cost and less invasive, and you don't have to do anything, is you get blue blockers, right? You get a blue blocking glasses, you get the UVEX Skyper on Amazon, you get the DeWalt laser enhancement glasses, those are the deep red ones, $10, and you wear red glasses at night and you can feel the difference of like, wow, everything's like really dark now, everything's like calmer. If you tend to watch TV before you go to bed while you're wearing these red glasses, you can start to feel how that shifts your sleep and how you might be more inclined to fall asleep earlier or at least get more drowsy. So that's the first step, is that you can wear something, wear the red goggles or the red glasses over your eyes to simulate how it would feel, and it's only $10 and you don't have to install anything. I think that's the best way to convince someone that red lights are useful without much of an investment or even time investment. You just wear it. And then once you're convinced of that, of wearing blue blockers, then you'll say, okay, I need more red lights because actually there's not enough red light. When you wear the dark red blue blockers, you start to stumble around because the spectrum of normal LEDs barely have any red to begin with. So you can't even see where you're going. And then you start to install more red lights. It could be, you know, I think, wasn't there a brand on Amazon? I can't remember the name. It was like sun something. It was a red coated bulb. LED bulb that someone said it was low flicker.
I think Extreme Health Radio might have posted that on their
Yeah,
Instagram. I can't exactly remember, but I thought red incandescent was like the gold standard.
yeah,
Red
for
colored
sure.
glass.
Yeah, if you can find a red incandescent, then I would go for that. If you can get it coated red, but not like the heat lamp that's 250 watts, that's too much. But if you can find like whatever a standard 60 watt old school incandescent with the red color, that would be really really ideal because you got the deep reds and you get the infrared, and that's a nice way to go. So if you can find that, that's a good way to go. But like I said, if you can, you're probably going to end up finding red LEDs or low blue LEDs to get started with. Because a lot of times, I find people have a tough time adjusting to. You can't go from white lights at night to pure red lights at night. Sometimes people have an adjustment issue. So you start with amber lights and amber glasses, and then you work your way into the red lights and the red glasses.
Yeah, I think that's good. And obviously also candle is, if you can, it's very impractical, but if you can, candles, especially in the bedroom before sleep, that's
Mm-hmm.
the optimal form of
Yeah,
night lighting. Last question is, what does the future hold for Gemba Red?
yeah. I hopefully a lot. Hopefully a lot. I want to test more panels, test more future products. I'm trying to develop some stuff. I don't want to say too much, but try to continue to develop some more unique solutions for the market that incorporate red either for nighttime to improve functionality, or more therapeutic red panels too that are still practical, lower EMF, kind of easy to work with and move around. And then do more education on how to test panels, and maybe some more reviews on comparing my panels to different competitors, and showing people, okay, let's do some side by side comparisons and see how they match up in a controlled setting with all the test equipment that I've accumulated over these years, and say, okay, this is how to kind of think about these things and how to start to compare them. So it should be an interesting year for Gamba Red. Hopefully to kind of streamline some of the products, and really go into some neat new stuff.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing more and learning more off your blog and your Instagram posts. I've got a lot of value off them, and also just sometimes I just, as you know, ask you random questions that I
Mhm.
think of, and you always have good answers to them. So, if people are listening, obviously don't spam him, but
Yeah,
ask Gemba Red on Instagram questions you have, because he's very helpful.
yeah, and
So thanks for
sometimes,
coming on.
yeah, a lot of times I get feedback from people, and then I think about it. And I'm like, well, maybe I could do a post about it, or maybe I could test something about it, or even produce products like some people were asking me, hey, can you do something flexible that's better for travel? So I tried to go into that, and so I get feedback, and I love getting feedback because I need to know what people like and what they don't like. Otherwise, I just make products that I like, and that's fine too. But it's sometimes nice to hear from other people.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on the show. It's been a really good, productive episode. I'm sure a lot of
For
people have
sure.
got value out of it.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, and yeah, I hope to spread this. I think this really encapsulates, like, a lot of the important nuggets of red light therapy, and what people should be understanding and looking for, and hopefully inspire people to dig in deeper.
Yeah, 100%.
Cool.
Thanks, Andrew.
All right. Thank you.
Well, there you go. That was Andrew LaTour of Gembared. If you're interested in purchasing anything from the Gembared product line, you can use the discount code Grow Sanctuary in order to save some money. Unfortunately, at this point in time, Gembared only sells within the United States of America. So, if you're international, like a lot of my listeners and readers are, then just hold on. I'm in the process of doing some research to find, one or two red light therapy device selling companies that are high quality and also can provide international shipping. So once I get that sorted, you'll find the details in the video description for this YouTube video. It'll be on my website, growsanctuary.com. It'll be on my Instagram and any other platforms that I'm on. And that's sort of a trend that you will see on my website and other platforms, that sometimes there's going to be more than one product within one category, and it's for that purpose. Sometimes it depends on what part of the world you're in. Sometimes it's more convenient to purchase from certain countries or not from certain countries due to shipping costs, import taxes, and things like that. So it's just something worth taking into consideration, and I try to have good information available for the majority of people. But yeah, this was a good episode on red light therapy. It's, basically a form of supplements. And like Andrew was talking about, there's lots of uses and it's very beneficial to the body. I would say the key takeaway, well, there's many, but one of them would be we didn't actually talk about circadian biology too much, but really get morning sunlight first thing in the morning. Really beneficial, as much skin as possible. And also, I would actually say getting a red bulb or some red bulbs is more important than a red light therapy device, because then you can actually, you're not going to get the therapeutic benefits because it's not powerful enough and you're not close to the bulb. But then you'll be able to get around in the morning and at night in your home without stumbling on things, because you obviously want to turn off all the standard lights that emit a lot of blue light. So getting some red bulbs means you can pretty much carry on with life as normal now that you're aware of the dangers of blue light. So definitely get a red bulb. Obviously candles are the best, but if you're looking for bulbs, you want a red-colored incandescent or a red-colored halogen or a red-colored LED. Another thing I'd like to mention is don't rush into purchasing one of these. I mean, you don't have to take forever, and the industry is getting better, but I really regret rushing into purchasing the red light therapy device that I own 3 years ago. It was 2017. I rushed into it, and it works, but it's from a company that I wouldn't really, basically I wish I hadn't bought it from them. That's all I'll say for now. If you want the details on that, you can get in touch. But yeah, don't rush into it. Do your research. This episode, hopefully it made it a lot easier to understand the different facets of a device like that and what to consider. And lastly, if you're interested in my work, you can check it out there's the website, growsanctuary.com, Instagram @growsanctuary. That's where I'm most active. You can send messages and questions there. And YouTube, Grow Sanctuary, BitChute, and also I will be putting these podcasts up on, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, things like that. So lots in store. Hit subscribe, and thank you for listening.